Hello, my name is Jeff Campbell, and I'm the pastor of Bethany Baptist Church in Dallas, Texas. It is my joy and my honor to be able to share with you some of the sermons that I've preached from the pulpit of Bethany Baptist Church. We are a church that is Christ-centered, we are multi-ethnic, we are multi-generational, and God has placed us in a transitioning community to minister His gospel. So go with us to the Scriptures today and enjoy this exposition as we seek to apply God's Word to our life.
Now we will go to Mark 14. And we'll be looking today at verses 53 down through 65. Now, we're in a series called Failure. A lot of things are happening right now. A lot of things are coming down right now. A lot of things are transpiring in the life of Jesus. And we've seen that over the past couple of weeks as we've studied. He has been arrested right now. He has been basically deserted by His disciples. He's standing alone amongst His enemies. And as we come into our narrative today, we're going to see that He is involved in what you might consider to be a trial. As we look at this today, we need to keep something specific in mind. We don't want to fail today to miss the revelation of what Jesus is about to say within this text. Now, back in the 1800s, there was a huge migration from the east to the west as it was found that gold was in California. And once gold was discovered, California began to boom. People dropped everything they had, sold their land, went to California looking for gold. The great gold rush and migration of people to that side of our country. In that same time, there was a phrase coined in the English language called kangaroo court. Now, we don't know exactly where the phrase comes from. Of course, kangaroo makes you think of Australia, and there were a lot of Australian nationals who were present in America and went to California in the gold rush. That is a possibility. Most of the early kangaroo courts were formed to address the issue of claim jumping. You would go into an area, you would file a claim on a certain portion of land, you would go, you would work your land, and if you found gold, great. If you didn't, you would renounce that claim, maybe make another claim, and land was just there for the taking. But in the midst of all that, when somebody over here found gold, inevitably somebody would try to say, you're on my claim, that's my land. And with the absence of set surveying lines and the absence of set boundaries, a lot of times you would have to convene a group that would get together and they would decide whether this was a valid claim or whether someone had jumped onto someone else's claim. That may be where we get the idea of a kangaroo court. But it's not so important where we get the name. What's important is what it is. A kangaroo court is a group of people that convenes together which already have the verdict. It's a semblance. It's a facsimile. It is a false form of justice where people come together and say, well, just so we can look like we're doing the right thing, let's get together and make our decision. But we all really know what happened. We all know this person has jumped that other person's claim. Let's get together. We know what the verdict's going to be, but let's get together and pretend like we're administering justice. In our own justice system, are we not considered innocent until proven guilty? Or at least that is the foundation. That is the principle we are supposed to hold to. You are supposed to arrest someone on suspicion of a crime, and yes, you detain them, but they are not convicted of that crime until they have had their day in court, where the evidence is presented objectively, and where a group or consensus of people go there and say then, this person committed the crime and they deserve to be punished. Well, when we come to our narrative today, when we come back to where Jesus is in His story, He is standing in the middle of a kangaroo court. He is standing in the middle of a group of people who already have their verdict in mind. What they seek to do is they seek to find a way to look like they are justified in front of everyone. Turn to Mark 14, beginning in verse 53. And they led Jesus away to the high priest. And with him were assembled all the chief priests, the elders, and the scribes. But Peter followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest. And he sat with the servants and warmed himself at the fire. Now, we could discuss a whole lot of things based on that verse alone, based on the fact that Peter is still following Christ, although it may be half-heartedly. Now, I know during the course of this sermon, you're going to hear another voice in the balcony. Tune that out. We have a problem with our translation system today, and so that nobody misses hearing the Word of God, you will hear Ray in the background translating for me to a group of people who need to hear the Bible preached. Tune that out. Tune in with me. Keep your mind, keep your focus on this. and let's continue to forge ahead. So we can talk about the wisdom of Peter going and sitting with all the enemies of Christ. We can talk about the wisdom of Peter trying to infiltrate and trying to see what's going on. We see that he walks into this courtyard and he is surrounded by servants of the high priest, and we're at the high priest's home now, his personal residence. And Peter is now sitting outside in the outer courtyard with all the servants as they usher Jesus into the inner part of the house, and they convene a trial of sorts, a mock trial, if you would, a kangaroo court, to decide Jesus' fate when they already know what they intend to do to him. And we could talk about why would Peter associate himself, and we could talk about all those things, but that is not what the text talks about. It is a very important verse as we come back to it for next week's sermon. So keep that in mind. But Peter is now left in the narrative. Peter comes in, he sits down outside, everybody else moves inside, and so we don't see much of Peter anymore until the end. Now as we go forth, we see what they're trying to do. First of all, in any court, in any trial, you have to have somebody who is leveling the charge. We would call that person the prosecution in our way of thinking. The prosecution, though, is full of false witnesses. Let's look at verses 55 down through 59. Now the chief priests and all the council sought testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but found none. For many bore false witness against him, but their testimonies did not agree. Now, this idea of false testimony is a direct violation of the 9th commandment, is it not? God says in the 10 Commandments, "Thou shalt not bear false witness against your neighbor." And we understand this to be lying. And they are lying, they are intentionally, and Mark points it out right here. There's no maybe or maybe not. Perhaps they're saying the right thing, perhaps they're not. Mark just calls it like he sees it, and he says, many got up and bore false witness against Jesus. So they come together, they bring Jesus in. We got the chief priests, the scribes, the elders, all the Sanhedrin, and they're all packed in the high priest's house, and Jesus is out there in the middle amongst all of them, and they begin to stand up and lie about what Jesus has been doing. And they seek to find a charge that they might convict him on. Because they wanted, in verse 55, to put him to death. That was their intent. They had already cast the verdict. They knew what the answer was. The kangaroo court was in session, and they simply said to themselves, we must have a way to justify the decision that we're about to make. So in verse 55, the chief priests, the council, sought testimony. They were actively trying to find anyone who could stand up and say something that was worthy to put Jesus to death. But they found none. Verse 56, for many bore false witness against him, but their testimonies did not agree. Then some rose up and bore false witness against him, saying, we heard him say, I will destroy this temple made with hands, and within 3 days I will build another made without hands. But not even then did their testimony agree. Now, let's look at this as a section. Let's look at this, verses 55 through 59. Number one, we already saw in verse 55, the verdict is in. They're just simply seeking to find a charge that would necessitate them convicting Jesus and putting him to death. They already know they want to kill him. They already know they don't like what he's doing. They already know that they don't agree with how he conducts himself and how he does his ministry. They already agree that he is a danger to their way of doing things. And they say to themselves then, let's get together, let's find a charge, and the charges are pending. Now there are lies and conflicting stories about the past. In verse 56, we see that they all stand up and they lie. You know, that's what the 10 Commandments says. Thou shalt not bear false witness. You should not lie. And that's the word that Mark uses. False witness. It is pseudo martyria, false witness. And they stand up and they begin to lie against Christ about the past. Well, you know, we heard him do this, or we saw him do that, or I remember one day he did this, but they never could get together on their lies. They couldn't get their story straight. And in Jewish tradition, at least 2 of them had to agree on something before they could charge Jesus with it. So he's sitting there very patiently, not answering anything, listening as all these false charges are leveled against him. And those are about the past. But then in verse 57, we move in and they start telling lies about the future. What do they say here? Some rose up and bore false witness against him, saying, we heard him say, I will destroy this temple made with hands, and within 3 days I will build another made without hands. But not even then did their testimony agree. Now what we see is that they're referring to John 2, verse 19. And Jesus does say, if you tear down this temple, I'll rebuild it in 3 days. And then John goes on to explain that Jesus was talking about his body. And now we know that he has been in the temple with the disciples, and we know that as they walk out, one of the disciples say, wow, look at all these beautiful buildings. Look at these bricks and these stones. Look at the carvings. And Jesus says, there will come a day when not one stone will be left upon another. He did say that. He did not say he was the agent of it. He did not say he was the one doing it. He didn't say he was raising an army together to come in and invade Jerusalem and knock down the temple. He said none of those things. He simply said, if you tear my body down,